According to experts, around 8000 BC, we were primarily hunter-gatherers, nomadic, unorganized clans who had only the most rudimentary stone tools.
Oh, by the way, we built the pyramids. No. None of that. In fact, the archaeologists say not only that the pyramids built, that the Egyptians built the pyramids, but they say that they built them as tombs. Okay. What's the evidence? Zero. Zilch. Not one pyramid was ever found to host a mummy. Not one mummy was ever found in a pyramid. Not one. And I'm not just talking about Egypt. I'm talking about all around the world. You know? That's all logical. Pyramids were not tombs. Pyramids were not built by Egyptians. No Egyptian text talks about the Egyptians building the pyramids. The texts do talk about monuments, enormous monuments being built. And who they say built them was the sun god. The Mayans, the Incas, the Chinese, the Japanese, all cultures that have these buildings, none of them say we built it. All of them say the sun gods taught us how to build, how to talk, how to write, how to do all this stuff. This is an ancient symbol that was found on a granite pillar in Abydos, Egypt, in a temple called the Osiris Temple. Why is it that this object, this drawing, which is on the 100-ton pink pillar in the middle of that temple, is not in any picture books or history books anywhere, or archaeological books anywhere? It took me 10 years of research to go through all the books that were written on the Osiris Temple, from the first papers that were published from the archaeologists that found the temple to eventually, you know, all the papers and the books that were written. None of them had this picture in it. The way I got this picture is that a friend of mine went out there and took it. Okay? Why is it that this picture is not in there? I'll tell you why. Because this graphic is not carved into the rock. It's not etched into the rock. This graphic is actually burnt, laser burnt, into the atomic structure of that pillar. Now when you think of ancient civilization 5,000 years ago, you don't expect them to be doing laser burn on, you know, hard surfaces at high levels of accuracy. Okay? Archaeologists have a really hard time explaining these things. When they can explain something, usually the tendency is not to popularize it. So they leave it out. Some of these symbols that are in the Osiris Temple, there's no writing in all of that temple. Not one piece of writing. All there is these things. There's a few of them. Some of them are chipped. Well, the laser burn is through the rock. So that actually, even if you chip it, it still appears on the rock. We have no current technology to reproduce this. That's why you don't find this in history books. The other thing is that the Osiris Temple is 50 feet below all the other temples at Abydos. The archaeologists tried to say, oh, the Egyptians dug 50 feet and then started building. Well, the Egyptians never did that to any other building. And actually, when the geologists went there, they went, no, that's not the case. The building was there and sedimentation piled up beside it. Well, when they calculate how long it would take to get 50 feet of sedimentation, that temple is no longer 4,000 to 5,000 years old. That temple is 9,000 to 12,000 years old. Maybe 10,000 years old. That's why archaeologists really don't like that temple. In fact, they very rarely discuss it.
According to experts, around who had only the most rudimentary stone tools.
Did you know that 85% of all human beings have a monkey gene? The monkey gene is called the rhesus factor, or Rh factor, because it can be traced to the rhesus monkey. Chances are your blood type tests Rh positive, which means you've got the monkey gene. If by chance your blood type tests negative for the monkey gene, you are in a small minority of only 15% of the world's population. So what happens when an Rh negative woman gets pregnant with an Rh positive partner? Her body rejects, attacks, and kills the fetus, unless of course there's medical intervention. What is the cause of this strange breeding incompatibility within the human species? Are Rh negative people alien in some way? Studies were done to see if there's any difference between Rh negative people and Rh positive people. The results were shocking. Rh negative people commonly have a higher than average IQ, sensitive vision, a lower body temperature, increased sensitivity to heat and sunlight. They can't receive blood transfusions from Rh positive donors. They often have reddish hair and blue, green, or hazel eyes. Some even have an extra vertebrae or an extra rib. Have been examining and mapping human DNA, which has 35,000 genes consisting of over 3 billion chemical bases. It turns out that 97% of our DNA is junk DNA with no known use or function. Failing any other explanation for this shocking revelation, scientists are now considering the notion that our genetic code was written by an extraterrestrial programmer who wrote two versions of our genetic code, a big code and a basic code. Our so-called junk DNA is a hidden and dormant upgrade of our basic code. It is a clever, self-organizing, auto-executing, auto-developing, and auto-correcting software. In other words, the DNA that scientists have been calling junk DNA is really divine DNA. The facts show that our genetic programmer purposely disabled the big code and left us to exist on only 3% of our DNA. Like a broken radio dial which is stuck on one station instead of roaming across thousands of stations and frequencies, humans are stuck on one station called 5 sense reality.
There are about 250 unique human genes that are not found in any lower species. In fact, scientists have not been able to find any evolutionary basis for these genes. There are about 250 unique human genes that are not found in any lower species. In fact, scientists have not been able to find any evolutionary basis for these genes.
8,000 BC, we were primarily hunter-gatherers, nomadic, unorganized clans who had only the most rudimentary stone tool.
Mountain range in Southern California. As represented here for In Search Of, 3 rock hounds were out looking for interesting samples to add to their collections. They had already been looking for hours that hot day in July. What they found looked innocent enough, a geode common to that area. Yet, it somehow seemed different. Later, after they sawed the rock in half, they felt the discovery that inside was a strange ceramic-like material resembling some electrical device, like a spark plug. How old was it? While the findings have never been verified, the rockhounds claimed that a geologist placed the age at 500,000 years. X-ray results were astonishing. The object did not appear to be naturally formed. No one today can explain its existence.
8,000 BC, we were primarily hunter-gatherers, nomadic, unorganized clans who had only the most rudimentary stone tool. 8000 BC, we were primarily hunter-gatherers, nomadic, unorganized clans who had only the most rudimentary stone tools.
Supposedly closest nearest kin until just recently. Neanderthal fingertip bone, human fingertip bone. Segment of Neanderthal thigh bone, human thigh bone. Look at the difference. Not even close. This is quarters to dimes, shovel handles to broomsticks. No comparison. Our supposed, and we used to be told absolutely, they insisted, they swore. We came directly from those guys. Even looking at this kind of evidence, that is what they insisted. Why? Because they have to explain it in terrestrial terms. Understand that science is hamstrung. They've painted themselves into a corner. They have to explain everything in terrestrial terms. They do not allow for outside intervention, whether that outside intervention is extraterrestrial or divine. And so they have to come up with explanations like this to suit the data, which doesn't at all support their conclusions. All right, here's the drawing that shows it a little more accurately what the prehumans are vis-a-vis the humans. Notice that in the drawings the hands are down pretty much where they belong relative to ours. Also notice the rib cages are the upside down funnels of primates in the prehumans as opposed to ours. What's the situation there? Well, you can't tell it very well from here, but all of the prehuman heads are stuck on their bodies like that. The way primates are. Their heads are down in on their shoulders. Only we have that elevated neck sticking our head up off of our torso. They also have that extra arm length and that extra power. And now, the main thing to understand here is there is not a single human bone in the so-called prehuman fossil record. The main thing I want you to understand, there's not a single human bone in the so-called prehuman fossil record. And guess what? Anthropologists will not argue the point with you. An idiot can see it. An idiot can see it. All you got to do is point it out to them. Well, they know that. So they say, you're right, you're right. There's not a single human bone in the prehuman fossil record, even though we insist that these are indeed prehumans. The reason we can get away with this is because we're going to put somebody right in here that's going to show a transition between these guys, and that is the missing link, the famous missing link. You've all heard about that. This is what it is. This is the thing that's going to stand right in here and miraculously show a smooth transition from this to this. Well, I tell you what, if the missing link was here today, he would need about 20 or 30 cousins standing right beside him, showing enough gradual transition to make this plausible. You don't just get one missing link. You need dozens to make this theory work of gradual transition, the Darwinian paradigm. And they don't even have so much as a fingernail, not a fingernail, of the missing link. Darwin's still intact, everything's still okay. Missing link's going to show up. It's been 140 years, not yet. It's been 140 years, not yet. It's been 140 years, not yet.
8000 BC, we were primarily hunter-gatherers, nomadic, unorganized clans who had only the most rudimentary stone tool. 8000 BC, we were primarily hunter-gatherers, nomadic, unorganized clans who had only the most rudimentary stone tool.
I received an email from a person who wants to remain anonymous, and this is what he said to me. He is a geneticist, a full-blown geneticist. And he says, "Dear Mr. Pye, I agree with your conclusions and will give you a few hints, if you wish, as a DNA deep throat. First, look up the huge discontinuities between man and the various apes for whole mitochondrial DNA, genes for the RH factor, and human Y chromosomes, among others. Regarding number 3, the chromosomes, I refer you to K.D. Smith's 1987 study titled Repeated DNA Sequences of the Human Y Chromosome. It says most human Y chromosome sequences so far examined do not have homologs, which are similar sequences, on the Y chromosomes of other primates. Human female DNA does look somewhat ape-like, but not the male Y. This means that if we are a crossbred hybrid species, as you contend, meaning me, the cross had to be between a female ape-like creature, a creature of the earth, as the Sumerians said, and a male person from elsewhere, as I also contend." He goes on to say, "What the evolutionists do is find certain genes which look very similar between man and ape, then they make a tree of descent while ignoring those huge impassable abysses of difference elsewhere. Also, by certain methods of DNA dating, one can tell that numerous genes have been recently added to the human genome. If workers in my field were to say such things openly, we would be ostracized, as I also contend, and forced to live in a tent. Any work along these lines would be rejected without any form of appeal. So what can we do? Sincerely, DNA deep throat." One can tell that numerous genes have been recently added to the human genome.
brain cells are not done forging links with billions of other brain cells. Eventually, there will be trillions and trillions of connections between cells, charged with electrical pulses rippling like lightning storms across the hills and valleys of the brain's deeply furrowed tissue. Every cell in its place, every link between cells carefully organized. Nothing random, nothing arbitrary.
What we would really love to understand is how the brain during development generates millions and millions of neurons, sends them to the right position in the brain, and then somehow instructs each of those individual nerve cells to form very, very specific connections with one another. You can think about development like a play that follows a script that is written down by the genetic code, but it has no director, it has no producer, and it has a bunch of actors that have never spoken their lines before. Despite all this, you pull the play off. To me, that's a miracle. To me, that's a miracle. To me, that's a miracle.
The pineal gland is located within the vertebrae brain between the left and right hemispheres. It is roughly the size of a grain of rice and is fully grown at 2 years of age. The gland is stimulated by darkness and hindered by light. It produces melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone which influences your biological clock. It is said that the pineal gland is the crown chakra, or the third eye, and that it is a bioluminescent gland that can improve learning capabilities, increase memory, enhance intuition, wisdom, and creativity, and may be the link to enhancing psychic abilities. A healthy lifestyle of exercise, outdoor activities, eating natural unprocessed foods, and reducing your sugar intake will be the first steps to activating your pineal gland. The pineal gland resembles a pine cone. The pine cone has been used in symbolism for thousands of years. Many historical figures from Osiris to the Pope hold a staff of the pine cone. There is no question that the pineal gland and its purpose have been known throughout history. There is also no question that those in power have suppressed the development and knowledge of the pineal gland. For example, this model brain for educational purposes does not even label the pineal gland. So if the pineal gland is activated by dark, then why don't we live our waking hours at night and sleep during the day? Or if the pineal gland is hindered by light, then why do we stare into TV and computer screens blasting light into our eyes? Well, I think the suppression of the pineal gland is obvious. Spiritually strong people are very hard to break down and made into mindless drones. Free thought and expression should never be suppressed. So explore the infinite universe within you. Balance your mind, and anything is possible.